my biggest tip is like understand what your boundaries are. Try to work on the projects where you know that those are going to be respected, but it could happen where you find a point where whoever is in charge of the project is asking you to push past those boundaries. And I think, honestly, I think you need to have the integrity to know when to walk away.
You're listening to Talk Doc to Me, a podcast and community dedicated to candid conversations around documentary storytelling. I'm your host and fellow filmmaker, Leah DeLeon, and today's guest is Emily Stoker. Emily is a documentary director and producer who helps do-good brands optimize their impact through documentary production and communications. She has created works for Bloomberg, BBC Studios, and National Geographic. Emily is a world traveler who speaks multiple languages. She has an amazing YouTube channel about travel and documentary filmmaking. And let's be honest, her accent is amazing. You're welcome. I really enjoyed my conversation with Emily and hope you will too. If you've been enjoying these episodes, leave us a review. Say hello. We'd love to hear from you and hear what you're loving and what you want to see for season 2. Our team has had a lot of fun putting this together, and so we'd love to meet our listeners. And with that, we will get right into the episode. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me to be on the podcast.
And so you are calling from London. I'm based in San Diego, and I'm so excited to chat with you today. Why don't we start with, did you go to film school, and what was your experience like first getting into documentary filmmaking?
So right off the bat, no, I did not go to film school. I actually studied languages at university. So I did go to college. We call it university here in the UK. And I did a 4-year course studying French and Italian, which included a study abroad portion where I actually did a load of internships rather than studying. We sort of had the choice. And essentially, during my time at university, I was doing a lot of digital media projects just for myself, for fun. So like I started a YouTube channel, and that was how I first got interested in making video. And I was kind of using those skills in those internships when I was working abroad. And for me, like that, it's also instrumental to the journey to how I got here now. But to make it very, very short, or I will try to make it very, very short, I carried on doing the YouTube thing because I loved it.
What were some of like the first YouTube videos that you did? Or like what made you think I'm going to start YouTube? Did you watch a lot of YouTube growing up, or?
Honestly, if we go right back to the start, it must have been like 2006, like right when YouTube was starting. I really think I was about 12 at the time, and I was making like comedy videos on YouTube because that was all that I really saw existing at the time. And so I like dabbled with that, but didn't really take it seriously. But when I was 16, I started making beauty videos. I knew nothing about makeup, but this was, I don't know, I guess I
like tutorials. Like you were like, this is my eyeshadow, I'm doing this. Wow. Yeah. Okay, we got to see those.
I've hidden them, so if you find them, tell me, because I need to hide them better. But no, it was in 2015 maybe when I made the channel that I've got today that still exists, and I was making videos about my time abroad during university. So, and then that just kind of evolved into living abroad because I ended up moving back to Italy after I graduated, and then I ended up, taking a shot at making video production my job, and that evolved into documentary filmmaking. Like it was quite intentional at a certain point, but I'm condensing
right. But
it's
an evolution. It's an evolution, and I do have to say I live vicariously through you because I studied abroad in Paris, and I had this feeling of, oh my gosh, this is a perfect opportunity to start my YouTube channel. Like this is exciting. This is fun. I also love to travel. And so I did have a little stint there where, I vlogged a little bit and talked about, my apartment and the classes I was taking. And it was really good experience still. And that's that one of the what ifs in my brain of like, what if I just like totally just went ham on YouTube and just like did a ton of videos of my study abroad experience. So I think maybe a lot of people have that kind of inclination or idea of making videos when they study abroad, where a lot of people can take away something from that.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, one thing that I really love YouTube. Like, I know that I wouldn't be doing, well, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't be doing video if it weren't for YouTube, because it gave me that, like, it made it feel accessible, and it was accessible in a way that it wouldn't have been 20 years ago, even like 10 years before my generation kind of got to, you know, the age where they would be able to teach themselves something like that.
You went to
Um,
YouTube University. Same with my husband.
yes, exactly. But I really recommend it to people. Like, I don't know, I guess this is like one of the things that we can talk about today, like film school versus no film school. I like, even in my 20s, when I was really trying to intentionally like move away from the digital media clients that I was working with and move more towards video production clients, I was like, well, I really love documentary. I want to take this more seriously. Should I do a master's? Like, there are some really great masters that you can do here in London, like postgrads that are really specific to documentary filmmaking, or a journalistic look at video content, or, you know, film, or, you know, there are lots of different approaches to it. But I was looking at these courses, and I just couldn't justify spending the money. And even when I got my head around, like, okay, I can spend the money, it was like, I got through to the interviews for one, actually. I did end up applying for one of these courses, and I got through the interviews. And at a certain point, like, I got through to the second round of the interviews, which was going to be more like a workshop. But I had got offered, or I was actually working a contract at the time for a TV show. I was like assistant producing and shooting on it. And then it turned out that they wanted me to be in Switzerland doing some shooting the week that the second round of the interviews would have been. So I like emailed the school. I was like, is there any flexibility? I'm literally going to be in Switzerland filming what's essentially a documentary. And, you know, that's what I want to do. That's why I've applied for your course. And they were like, no, there's no flexibility on that. And then also they were saying, like, during the course, there's no flexibility to be doing freelance work on the side because it's just so intense. And I was like, it's just not worth it to me to not have this real world experience.
Well, right. And I like to think of it as, would you rather get paid to learn or, pay to learn? It's
Right.
a very interesting thing because you have the opportunity to make a document, and it's all, I mean, I went to film school, and honestly, like at Chapman University, it was very hands-on. It was very like, just make a film. And I think it's not like I learned anything so crazy that someone that makes 5 documentaries or just starts making videos won't find out themselves. It's very much about just being proactive, getting out there. Like, you can't learn everything by a textbook, right? Like, and you're just going to have that real world life experience. So that's cool. You went to Switzerland. What did you do in
I
Switzerland?
did. This was for a series that I worked on in 2021. I was just trying to get more credits on TV work, because at that point I was very set on trying to work my way up the ranks in broadcast and
Mm.
work on more like serious documentaries and broadcast, whatever that means. But this one was sort of like a travel show, but it was like sort of like the most expensive places in the world to live, and like the crazy rich people who live there and what they do,
So
which
did you get to stay in the most expensive places?
I did. So I
Ooh.
went to San Moritz, which is like a really fancy ski destination in Switzerland in the mountains. Beautiful. But we went during the summer, so I don't think that was intentional, to be honest. I think they were like, oh, let's do San Moritz, it's so fancy. Oh, we're filming in the summer. Whoops, we'll just make it work. But it was still really beautiful. And
How old were you at
yeah,
this time?
I would have been 26, I think.
Mhm.
No,
What did
maybe 27.
what
Yeah.
did your parents think of your career choice? Like, when you decide, like when you went to Switzerland, you said, I'm not getting a master's. I'm going to go to Switzerland.
Yeah. They've always been very supportive. Like, I will say, when I was doing my undergrad, like I was studying French and Italian, they were like, I wanted to drop out at quite a few points, and they really tried to encourage me to stay. And at some points, that was quite difficult for me to stomach. Um, but then they just, you know, once I graduated and got that degree, they were kind of like, well, now your life's your own. Like, you know, we'll support you in whatever you want to do. So they were never like pushing me to do a postgrad or anything like that.
Mhm.
yeah, I think that, yeah, they would be proud of me, whatever sort of direction I took. So
Yeah.
I'm lucky in that sense. I know it's not as easy for everyone with their parents when it comes to juggling like what to do with their life.
Definitely, definitely. So you studied French and Italian, then you go to Switzerland, and then what? What happened? What's like the next big milestone in your career?
I don't know. The story I always tell myself is like I studied French and Italian, I graduated, I moved to Italy after that, and I
Mhm.
started working freelance. And then there's a chapter which we're kind of missing, which is when I lived in Belgium. But then I moved to London, and then I started getting these opportunities in television, and Switzerland was one of those opportunities.
So when you decided that you're going freelance, what was your like first course of action? And were you still doing YouTube on the side still? Like were you sending out emails to agencies being like, here's some videos I've done before? Or how did you go about like trying to land these like TV credits?
Yeah. Well, I was already working freelance at this point. Like I've never
Okay.
had a normal job, but I
Me
would
either.
say yeah, I mean, I kind of like it that way. But
Me too. Me too. Me too.
it's got its ups and its downs. But I think the time that you're talking about would have been when I moved to London, and this was 2020, just before the pandemic. And actually, my first ever credit in TV was before the Switzerland one, but it was also I got offered that job because of my language skills. It was just after the first lockdown had ended. So we were like allowed outside, and some people were traveling. And basically, these production companies in, well, I guess around the world, but at the time I was in the UK, these production companies in London who were filming these travel shows had a lot of filming that they hadn't been able to do over lockdown, that suddenly they needed to meet their quota for the programs that have been commissioned. And so they were looking for people like me to go on location and help them to make the shows as
Right.
assistant producer. It's in the UK, it's weird. Like we have titles that I don't think are as common in the US, at least
Where?
like in broadcast. Like it's very common in TV to have shooting producer director who will basically, I mean, it's what it says on the tin, basically. They are producing and directing and doing the shooting. Like it's less common, especially now that budgets are getting smaller, to have a team where you've got one person who just does one thing. But I love that. So the way that I got that very first job was actually through a website. It has a lot of UK jobs in there. I think it has US jobs as well. It's called the Talent Manager, and I
Mm-hmm.
used to just scroll through there and like apply to things. I didn't apply to that much stuff at the beginning because I was like, am I qualified? But I was qualified for this one, so I applied and I got the job. And that was also how I got my second job. Again, like a posting on the Talent Manager looking for somebody who spoke Italian.
How many languages do you speak?
I speak French and Italian. Like Italian's definitely the best, and then my French is still pretty good. I also speak Portuguese now because my boyfriend's Portuguese. And those are ones that I can work in. But then I speak a little bit of Spanish, and I would like to improve that because that opens up a lot of, Latin America for traveling and like making documentaries. So yeah.
Definitely. Do you feel like just thinking about other people that might be studying language or drawn to linguistics, like what is unique about that experience of diving into language that you feel like helps you in documentary filmmaking?
It opens up such a big discussion because the first thing that comes to mind is that it opens up cultures that would be very difficult to make films about if you didn't speak the language. And of course, I know that it is possible to be an English speaking director and to kind of fly to wherever you go and work with a fixer or a translator to help you to get interviews with your subjects, or to sort out the permits, or to sort out whatever it is. Like, there's the logistical side that becomes easier if you speak the language. But I think that when it comes to forming a connection with your subject on screen, and not just the contributor that you're filming or the people you're trying to build relationships with, because I really believe that so much of great documentary footage, the work that can make the big difference is forming strong relationships with your subjects and contributors. There's that part. But then this brings in the question as well of like, okay, so it opens up sides of the culture that would be difficult to express and translate to an audience that doesn't speak that language when you speak it fluently.
Mm.
But even if you decide that you're not the best person to tell that story, if you're like, okay, well, like I personally am a white filmmaker, so maybe I don't want to fly into like somewhere in Latin America and be the person that tells a story for a community in one of these cultures. I can still find a co-producer and work much better with them and understand much better what it is that they need to do to form those relationships and have their perspective come through, and to kind of be amplifying voices rather than writing the story for other
Mm-hmm.
people. And I love playing around with that in documentary because, you know, it can be a really dangerous tool actually, but when it's done right, I think that it can just be fantastic and so powerful and hopefully empowering for the people who are in it rather than them feeling exploited.
Definitely. Do you have any stories of, you being on set or interacting with a character that maybe on the surface it looks like you don't speak Italian, for example, but then you start speaking Italian to them and you kind of see them relax or they're excited or you kind of see their demeanor change. Has that ever happened to you?
I don't have like the perfect that this is the perfect depiction of that in a nutshell, but I just think of all the times where working in broadcast, I was always working as the assistant producer. What that basically means is that, I mean, a lot of the time I was doing the work of a producer, but I was doing everything to what the director wanted. So they would kind
Mm-hmm.
of say, oh, I want the XYZ to happen. I'd be like, I'll find a way to happen. I'll find a way to make it happen. Off I go. And there have been quite a few times where I've been with the director on location, particularly in Italy, where I feel like that's the culture and the language that I know best. And as much as a linguistic translator, I was being a cultural translator. Like we were having real trouble on. There's a show in the UK. This was my very first credit where the premise of the show, it's like a travel show where you'll get a British couple who want to go and start a life in a foreign country. So in this case, they were going to this island off of Italy, in Italy, called Sardinia, and they want to buy a house there. And like our job as producers is to kind of set up these house viewings for them to go and look at, and then at the end have the possibility for them to actually put an offer in on one of the houses if they want to. So I'm with the estate agent, touring around a house, and we're trying to figure out what would a realistic kind of offer be for if the couple wanted to put an offer down. And I just remember like it had been so difficult for us to line up these viewings in the first place. Like it was in August, which is serious business for Italians. Like you don't work in August. You're supposed to be at the beach or in the mountains, like having a good time. This might sound really stereotypical, but honestly, it's very difficult to get anything done in August, work-wise, in
Across Europe,
Italy.
right? Across Europe, or is it mostly Italy?
Yeah. Well, I've seen it from the places that I've worked, like France, Portugal, Italy. I'd say it's most prevalent in Italy, but it definitely, like I remember in Paris, like August, it's just deserted because everyone's on holiday. So yeah, it's a real it doesn't exist as much in the UK. I think that maybe
It definitely doesn't
Anglo-Saxon.
exist in the US, as you know.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. But I remember the senior producer was on location with us, and like the senior people on the production had been having real trouble understanding why we were having so much trouble setting anything up. It was the middle of the holidays. It was this, Sardinia. They're not always that open to people who were coming from communities outside. And like we were looking in this really fancy area of Sardinia, and the senior producer was like, Emily, like, I think he even said it to the real estate agent who spoke a bit of English. He was like, listen, if somebody just came to you and said to you, like, you know, I'm going to pay you today in cash for this apartment, how much would you realistically accept for it? And the guy was like, kind of like went back with his hands up. He was like, no, 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 I don't take, like, that's not something I'm interested in. And I had to kind of explain to the guy that it's like, he's taking what you said very literally. He thinks you're going to try and pay him in cash. And being in this area where a lot of like rich people, where you're not sure where the money comes from, like he was taking it literally, like he thought maybe we were going to be giving him like dirty money or something. So I'm not saying that that's something that applies to Italian culture in general, but it was a situation where I had to kind of use my like emotional intelligence and use what I knew about the culture of where I was to translate something not just in words, but in cultural norms to make sure that everybody was getting on and understanding each other. I hope that makes sense.
no, that totally makes sense, and I feel like it's interesting. Like I'm thinking about a scenario of, I made a documentary in Sri Lanka, for
Mm-hmm.
example,
Yeah.
and we would have a field translator with us like the whole time. But there's this one memory that I have of, we're filming, a family dinner happening, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
have the director who was also shooting, and I was the producer helping out, just kind of making sure that the schedule is going right. And then our field translator, and just the way that the house was kind of situated, we were kind of like outside the window, and they were all kind of like cooking inside. And it was the type of thing where my director was like filming, I was kind of whispering into the translator's ear, like, can you ask about this, like, can you ask about what he thinks about Sanu surfing, and then the translator would say something, and then it was, the director and I were just kind of like, was it good, like, okay, like, is there anything else, like, I don't know, like, the translator, do you have anything else, like, it's very like you're kind of like fumbling around in the dark a little bit. And even like when we would film some verite scenes, like we knew what we wanted out of it, but if we didn't have the translator near us, we kind of, and luckily like our character also spoke a bit of English, but there is definitely that barrier of just like, fingers crossed, I hope I got it, like I'm not sure, like I think based on like the energy of the room that I think we talked about it, but you literally don't know until you like transcribe it and translate it. And so there's so many like cultural things too that obviously like we don't know when we step into someone else's culture. So I think it's so cool that
Yeah.
you have that experience. And I feel like a lot of people, when they're thinking about doing a production in another country or something, they think, okay, I'm going to get a fixer, right? Like I'm going to have someone that is a
Mm-hmm.
local that knows everything, but maybe they don't know much about filmmaking, or maybe they don't know
Mm-hmm.
about, maybe they speak the language, but maybe they're not familiar with the culture. There's so many like layers to
Yeah.
truly understanding the environment that you're going into. So I think
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting. Have you ever been on a set where you have had a fixer, and like maybe when you haven't, or like can you just talk about what is a fixer, maybe for people that don't know
Yeah.
what a
Yeah.
fixer is?
Yeah, I definitely didn't know what a fixer was. Even like, I think I found out maybe 4 or 5 years ago. But a fixer is basically, I guess I would describe them as almost like a local journalist or a local production assistant who can help you doing things on location. But what they do can actually, you get different types of fixers for different types of jobs. I've worked with fixers who are there just to sort out the permissions when there's a lot of very like bureaucracy heavy things, which is so useful and important in Italy, where it's very bureaucratic. But also there are fixers who will be drivers as well and just literally drive you to places. They could be translators as well. They could help to set up, they could help to source contributors. They could help to find stories, or they could just be more like runners on the day, I suppose. But normally I'd say they're a little bit more involved than just being a runner, but they do tend to be somebody who is on location or at least knows more than you about the language or the culture or the bureaucracy of what you're getting into and can give you a hand.
Have you ever been a fixer yourself, or do you hire fixers a lot, or what's your like current status with fixers?
Yeah, so for the work that I've done, just sort of like client work or independent work, I've not worked with fixers, but that's normally because I'll choose to make stories about things that I'm able to do just by myself or with a very small team. But when I've worked on broadcast productions, I've worked quite a bit with fixers. We worked with a fixer in Switzerland, and we worked with fixers on some of the projects I was on in Italy. But usually, I'd say in Italy, it's almost always been more of like giving us a hand with the bureaucracy of things, getting permissions for, like, once we wanted to film in the Colosseum for one of the projects that I did, you need to know people in the right places, because basically you had one person in charge of giving the filming permissions for every single site in Rome, and she was just totally overworked, and you needed to have a good relationship with her in order to get the documents through in time. So
Right. How do you film in the Colosseum?
you give them a lot of money and you do a lot of bureaucracy. And yeah, I was only involved in that a very little bit on that particular project, because quite early on production decided, like, yeah, we need to get a fixer who's like, we wanted to film at a lot of different like ancient Roman sites around Rome, and we were like, if we've got all of these requests, we just need to invest in getting a fixer who can put the requests in for us. Yeah.
Wow. Was that, I'd love to talk to you about your experience with National Geographic, the
Yeah.
piece, The Lost Treasure in Ancient Rome. So, can you talk to me about your role on that and what was like the biggest takeaway for you, or like if you have a quick little story of what was exciting while you worked on that
Yeah.
set?
This was a couple of years ago. It was right after the Switzerland project, actually, where I got an interview to work on this National Geographic series that had been commissioned. So it was a production company here in London who were looking for Italian speaking shooting assistant producers to help to produce the series, and I came on in like the September of 2021 or something, and I was on the project until like November, I think. So it was really only a couple of months, but in those 2 months we had to find the stories that we were going to shoot, produce them, and then go to shoot them. So there was a lot of research involved, there was a lot of traveling involved, a lot of bureaucracy involved. But essentially the series was about these archaeology in these sites from the former Roman Empire, and about the archaeological work that's currently going on and what discoveries are they making. And
Was
yeah.
that the premise? Like when you got hired, like you said, like you there weren't necessarily stories attached to it. So was that the premise, and then you had to go find specific stories?
Yeah, and it works like, I don't know what it's like in the US, but certainly my experience of broadcast in the UK, it's very often like that. You'll have a production company that develops a story, pitches it to a commissioner, and then by the time they've been through all of that back and forth, had it green lighted, had the money, any research they did into existing stories might not be relevant anymore. They might be, so you might have some leads to follow up on, but
But
um,
sometimes they don't even have like a hot lead in, right? Like, did you
right.
have any warm connections?
I think maybe there was one, like there was, I mean, obviously, like they knew they wanted to film in the Colosseum, and we just had to find a way to make that work and feel relevant and new. So that in itself was a job of like story producing what was going to happen there. And
Right.
there was one other lead I was passed by a friend of mine who was also working on the project. But it wasn't a hot lead. It was like she'd had one call with them. They had found this amphitheatre in Tuscany, and I had to figure out what was going on and what we could go and film and kind of build the relationship. But all of the other ones were like, let's
Figure
go
it
to
out.
Google. Yeah, like what's
Wow.
going on?
That's so funny. That's interesting that you share that, because the one experience I don't do a ton of broadcasts, but I produced this piece for the BBC about homelessness in Chicago. And I was commissioned by like a production company, same like you, like they had an idea, they were going back and forth, the production company and BBC, like the commissioning producer, and they just had the idea of, okay, like we want to do a story in Chicago about homelessness during the COVID crisis. And they had a podcast interview that some other publication did, and they were like, something like this, you know.
Mm,
And we had a super tight turnaround. It was right around Thanksgiving. And I think we had like 2 weeks to turn around like the research, the production.
mm,
I wasn't even allowed to go on site because of COVID. So all of this was doing like it was all remote.
yeah.
And so I had to build these connections with people across the country and like find the story and then
Mm,
actually produce it. And I feel like it's an amazing feat, what producers do. Like it's I
yeah.
love producing in a sense because it's like anything is possible. Like you can pick up the phone and figure something out. And especially I loved being able to call them and say like, I'm a producer with the BBC. Like that was my favorite. I felt so official. I was like, wow, like this is cool.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting because I feel like a lot of people on the other side, they're like, oh, like, you know, maybe you just like got handed the story and you're there and you're just assisting. But sometimes producing is literally figuring everything out, and no one
Yeah.
knows. They're just like, go, have fun, like figure it out.
Yeah, and I think this is one thing that it's one of the things I love about producing, but ultimately it was something I found quite frustrating too, because in the framework I was working in broadcast, ultimately I was handing that work over to a director or a producer above me, or often there wasn't a producer above me. I was making it all happen, but then the director would shape it into something, and I'd be like, but I think it would be better like this. And of course I couldn't really say that,
Did you
but
work with a lot of the directors? Like, was it an outside director that would come in, or was it someone that like worked for the like National Geographic, for example? When would the director come in? Like for the Rome story, for example?
yeah, so it would depend on the project, but for the Rome story, from the outset, I joined the same week as the director, and the director was also contracted by the production company. So, like, National Geographic or whoever the commissioner is would kind of be like a senior manager who's like, you, here's some money, go off and do your thing. And then they check in every so often to see how things were progressing. And they could ultimately approve or say, like, we don't like that. But actually, like, the development of the stories and the execution was all down to us in that London production company.
Yeah.
So on that project in particular, it was a lot of working very closely with the director. And in that case, I'd say it was a lot of him being like, I want this, you go make it happen kind of
Mm-hmm.
dynamic. I was doing most of the producing, whereas he was doing a lot more of like the visionary stuff. So it was more of a traditional, I'd say, like director producer kind of situation. But like a lot of it depends on who you're teamed up with. Like obviously the personalities of the people and what skills they have and what they prefer to lean into is going to affect that dynamic and how you decide to work together.
Right. I was gonna say, because all the terms act, even in the U.S. and I'm sure in the U.K. too, like all the terms are just terms, right? Like
Hmm.
it's hard to define what a fixer is. It's hard to define what a producer is.
Yeah.
But I'm curious because I think you were about to talk about like the some of the gripes of being a producer sometimes, where you have a situation where you're producing it, you develop it, you have all these things, and you're still creative, right? Like it's not all about like the logistics of coordination and things like that. You still
Mm-hmm.
have a sense of story, but then maybe an outside director comes in, maybe you don't jive as well, and then how do you stand up to a director that you disagree with, or how do you
Mm-hmm.
navigate that director producer relationship when sometimes I feel like the producer maybe doesn't get as much credit or doesn't get as much authority over a story when in reality the producer was there all along doing all the research, doing all the story development. Can you talk a little bit about how that's been for you in your career?
I mean, what I'll say is I've been really lucky to work with a couple of great directors who I feel like really mentored me, and I felt really respected, and like there was back and forth, and ultimately like there was that hierarchy, but you know, they were producer director was their official title and I was assistant producer. Um but I have worked in on projects where I did feel like the director kind of swooped in and didn't listen to my perspective as much, which I particularly on projects where you have cultivated, like you know, build relationships with people and bring this body of work to the director who's just come in and they just start cutting stuff out and changing it and saying, actually, we don't want to do it like that, we want to do it like this, can you go? There's a way where that can be done nicely, but there are ways where it can be done where you don't feel like your perspective's being listened to. And very often, like, I tried to do things a certain way because I've tried the other avenues, or because, yeah, because I don't know, even like some of the things I've been asked to do, I'm like, oh, how do I feel about this ethically?
Mm.
Um, it can be really difficult. And
Do you have any tips of like maybe like if you're in that situation where you're
mm,
you're a producer, you have that director that maybe is, slashing things, or maybe they're disrespectful, maybe they are not nice to you, how do you go about those conversations?
I think it's really important you've got to be a great communicator if you're going to be a producer. So I think the first thing is you've got to try to build a relationship with the director where even if they're not your kind of person, you need to be able to um, express concerns you have or express your opinion. Even if it's just a creative difference in opinion, you need to be able to say that. And ultimately, it's their decision. So you need to respect it if they say no. But I think my biggest tip would be you need to decide what your ethical boundaries are, because particularly if you're making documentaries that are on heavier subjects, or even if they're not, if you're just working where there's always a power dynamic is what I'm trying to say. Like if you're the person that's like telling the story, you have the power to shape that. If you're working with people, for example, who are from lower socioeconomic situations, and they don't have as many tools at their disposal to kind of figuratively fight back, as it were. It can become for me, it could become a real ethical issue if somebody's trying to shape a story in a way that I don't totally agree with. So I would say, I think my biggest tip is like, understand what your boundaries are. Try to work on the projects where you know that those are going to be respected, but it could happen where you find a point where whoever is in charge of the project is asking you to push past those boundaries. And I think you need to have honestly, I think you need to have the integrity to know when to walk away. And I know that's difficult for some people who really need the paycheck. But if you're lucky enough not to be in that situation, I think that walking away would be the right thing to do if you found yourself there.
Mm. Or
It's
even
tough.
it is so tough, and there's so many layers to it, and it's so like situational, something that I try and do too is if I feel like there's, I don't know, like a miscommunication, or there's maybe a little tiff, or it's a little awkward or something,
Mm,
honestly taking a day to like sleep if you have the flexibility. Sometimes you're on set and
mhm.
you have to make decisions very quickly, but I find that, validating their perspective, being like, you know what, thank you for bringing this to my attention. This is giving me a lot to think about. Like, let's like sleep on it and like address it tomorrow, maybe. And I find
Yeah.
that maybe sleeping on something for a day, just letting it kind of like sit, especially if people are like heated up or something,
Mhm.
it's like, you know what, you're not going to actually progress, or you're not going to like change your perspective if you are in the heat of the moment, if you're like super
Yeah.
upset or anything like that. So that's something that I've tried to, in navigating some like tricky situations sometimes, of like, okay, like, thank you for bringing that to my attention. Like, that's totally valid. This is causing me to think more. Like, can I have some time to think about it? And honestly, asking time to think about it is kind of asking them also to think about it, right? So it kind of
Yeah.
buys you some time to not like make some rash decisions, or to, just have that time to step back and not be in the heat of the moment. I think is also something that I've learned in recent situations, that I think is helpful.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I'm not suggesting that anyone should, like, the advice I was giving, I don't want it to be misconstrued as like, oh, you're angry, quit
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
heat
yeah.
of the moment. Like, no, you need to exercise
Mm-mm.
all of your options that you've learned in building relationships and clear communication and trying to find a compromise that works for everyone before you go to that. But if push really comes to shove, I think certainly from what I've observed with the projects I've worked on, a lot of people are really scared of having their reputation tarnished if they leave a project, because we're only as good as our last reference. And that is a real concern. I'm not saying it isn't, and I know I'm coming from a very privileged position in saying, like, you should consider leaving a project if things have really just gone past what you're comfortable with. But since I am in that position, that's something I do feel
You have to
strongly
stand up for
about.
yourself. Yeah, you have to stand up for
Yeah.
yourself. Yeah.
But I hope I can continue to remember that, because I think that we are put in, we're asked to question, make a lot of decisions where I think that we should be thinking, like, how do I ethically feel about this? And it's good to exercise that critical thinking, because documentary filmmaking is such a powerful tool, as I said, that can be used for good or for not so good. So I think it's really great to just exercise those critical thinking skills through the process of producing the film.
Yeah, what are some questions for people to ponder before, or like you talked about like setting some ethical boundaries, right? And of course it depends on the topic and it depends on the person, but maybe what are some questions that are good to ask yourself before attaching yourself to a project, or if you're in a situation where you're uncomfortable, like what are some of those like, yeah, questions that you can ask yourself to help you identify like what those ethical boundaries are.
Yeah. I think understanding the perspective of whoever is going to be contracting you, or whoever you're going to be working with, like, what's the team's kind of approach to safeguarding? Like, if you're working on something that's sensitive, or even if it's not that sensitive, but you're working with, I don't know, like children, for example, or minors, like, are there considerations that need to be taken into account about protecting their identities, or I don't know, safeguarding again can be a very broad term, but from the beginning of the project to the very end, like, are the people that you're involving in the project going to be safe, essentially?
Yes.
Um, and then also informed consent. Like, I think that giving the contributor the power to pull out of the project at any point is ethically correct. Of course, like, people have to sign contracts, but at the end of the day, if you've got somebody who doesn't want to be on camera on the day of an interview, or somebody who've already filmed with and says, like, I just don't feel comfortable with this, you've got to have difficult conversations with them and know that they, yeah, they are within their right to pull out. I know it can be difficult with commissioners and like all the legal stuff you've signed on to, but you're the middle man or woman in that situation, and that's, yeah. So just asking the team what's their perspective going to be when it comes to safeguarding, and like making sure that the person they're filming with really understands what they're signing up for. Where's it going to be seen? Who's it going to be seen by? What could the impact be on them? And how can we keep them safe?
Mm.
Might not be as relevant for like a fun travelogue documentary or something, but for some
Right.
other films, it's vital.
And I think there's the idea too of like continuous informed consent, because sometimes a lot of, like, for example, like a lot of the original documentaries that we're working on at my company, it's we're new filmmakers. I don't necessarily know where it will end up. I don't have the perfect answer of what streaming
Mm-hmm.
platform we will end up on. I'm not sure if this is going to go to international film festivals, or if it will, you're kind of
Yeah.
betting on what it will be. But something that I feel like has helped me, because these are questions that, like, filmmakers, you have to like constantly ask yourself over and over again. And I feel like what I've kind of coined to help me like feel like I'm communicating in the right manner is like having an open line of communication that's constant and transparent. And that's something
Yeah.
that I've like kind of figured. I'm trying to like put into words what this all means, right? And it's such a hard
Mm.
exercise, but I feel like doing that helps me, because it's like, okay, like, I can ask myself, like, am I keeping an open line of communication? Am I keeping a constant line of communication? Because sometimes working on films, they take a long time. There might be a month that goes by that, what, I'm actually working on something else and I'm not even thinking about this documentary. But my character doesn't know that, right? They're living their
Mm-hmm.
life. They're like, wait, like, I haven't heard from Leah in a while. Like, is she still working on my documentary? So that's a question that I keep asking myself, like, am I constantly communicating? Even if it's like, hey, like, it's a new month, or it's I'm just checking in, how are you? But, I'm letting you know that I'm working on this other project. So like, it's kind of taking a backseat. We have to prioritize like being able to live also. So, and I think like having that expectation with your characters is really important. But then, yeah, and then transparency, right? Like, I don't know exactly where this will end up. Like, I will communicate as stuff comes up. And I think like that it's so hard to navigate this industry. It's
Mm-hmm.
changing. It's ethically questionable. It's there's not like a standard guide of ethics, and I don't think there ever really can be, because each situation is so unique. But
Yeah.
if you can maybe have that guideline of how you want to communicate with your characters, your contributors, like having those questions in place, putting them on a sticky note, and like asking yourself, am I doing those things? Maybe that could be helpful. Maybe that could be like a tangible way that someone can like actively like think about it, because it's so easy to get
Yeah.
like in the one set to another set to thinking about all these other things, but we're dealing with real people's lives, which is no joke. you know
Yeah, there was like a kind of joke that my first director told me when we were on set of this like fun travelogue show, and she was like, we're not doctors, it's not heart surgery, like nobody's gonna die. But then I started working on some more serious projects where it was like looking at like international crime gangs and stuff, and I was like, hmm, can't quite use that same motto in this kind of situation, because this is really serious stuff and we need to make sure we're doing our jobs so properly to make sure everybody's kept safe.
Definitely, definitely. One other quick question before we wrap up here. Um, so the piece of the lost treasure in ancient Rome, there's the moment where they unveil this vase, and I just
Yeah.
wanted to like ask you, like, what was that experience like? Did you know that was going to happen, or like how do you keep calm in like moments of discovery or like, pick your shot?
Right. Well, we didn't know that was going to happen. That was one of the really tricky things with this series was the commissioner had been sold on this idea of like what's being discovered right now. It's like, well, if you want to be there observing the moment of discovery, you can't plan for that. So we're just going to have to try and use the shooting days we've got as well as possible. And I think that was the only like that was the biggest thing certainly that was discovered on any of the shoots I was on. And it's a great example of where forming a good relationship with the people on site and speaking the language really helped because my director at the time was off shooting something else in another spot, but the sort of site director or the person in charge of supervising the site for the day liked me and came to find me. I was like, oh, they're about to pull out something if you want to go have a look, like very casual. And I was like, this is what the commissioner wants. So I somewhat kept calm, but I like ran up the hill of this archaeological site to like get the gimbal and the microphone that I needed, and I like ran downstairs to just try and cover it as best as possible. And so that was how that scene made it into the series of them discovering this vase. And like me being able to know what was being said, like I knew that they were talking about the fact they thought maybe there was a stamp on the vase, but then turns out it was just a thumbprint. Like, and it was this fun little interaction that made the moment a bit more interesting and made it into the final cut of the series. So that was very exciting for me, to be honest.
It's always those fun like moments that you just can't plan for in a sense, but you can
Yeah.
set up the schedule that you're there. So like in that scenario where you're not even sure if they're going to discover anything, like was your
Mm-hmm.
approach to it like, okay, like let's hang out here all day, basically have the cameras ready. If something happens, hopefully I'll be ready to start hitting record.
Yeah, so it was a bit of a nightmare, to be honest, to figure out how we were going to make the budget work for the kind of storytelling you wanted. You wanted to have some kind of story arc, so you couldn't just turn up on an archaeological site for one day only. So it was there was some coverage of like I don't know the beginning of September, and then we went later in October, and then again or beginning of October, then again later in October. But for each time, like there was a team out there shooting, and it was normally me and my director. We would be there all day, and we would have other things we could be filming that were more um, set up in the sense of let's have the site director telling us about how this all came to be, like why did they start digging here. Let's have I don't know, another supervisor telling us about their role on the site. Like there were sequences we could be filming even if something unplanned wasn't happening. But then the rest of the time, because there were two of us with camera on set, we could just be filming a B-roll, which could turn into a sequence in itself if something interesting enough happened, which is exactly what happened when I pulled the camera out when they were pulling the vase out.
So it's like having a plan, a backup plan, and then always having like one ear open and one eye kind of scanning at all times.
Yeah, it's like we go in with a shooting script, so you've always got a plan, but you know the shooting script is not going to be the script that you take into the edit. Like it's you have to go in with a plan, but you have to know the plan is going to totally change. But make sure that you've got the essential pieces of the puzzle to be able to take that into the edit and figure out from whatever you've got how you're going to turn that into a story.
What does a shooting script look like for you, or what's helpful? What is a shooting script to you?
So it's I've seen different shooting scripts. Like when it really depends. Again, it depends on the project, but I guess you could see it as sort of like a beat sheet. Like if you were to kind of think about the story that you've got in your head of what you would ideally like to film and what you know the kind of scenes or locations or dates or events or whatever it is that you're going to be able to film, trying to piece together like what coverage am I likely to get on that day and how does it fit into this story? And you write
We're
that down on paper. So it could be, I don't know, let's take the episodes of Treasures of Ancient Rome as an example. It might be like, okay, so on the first day we want to like do some establishing shots of the site and show how they're, with archaeology, you want to show they've actually done some digging from the beginning to the end. So like establishing shot, maybe let's like have a sequence where we've got Valeria, who's one of the people in charge of the site, showing us around and showing us like how they do this particular type of archaeology and what the things are they need to think about when they're excavating. And then, that could go into other sequences, and you're thinking of what you would like to film, and you're basically
Mm-hmm.
writing down kind of like an idealized script, let's say. But then I would very often just take that document and adjust it when you go into the edit. And sometimes adjusting it is really like, oh, well, we didn't cover this bit, but let's scrap that out and we can go without it. Or it might be completely changing the story round and changing the order of things based on the footage that you got.
Mm-hmm.
Which is something like I'd not seen people do until I started working in broadcast. Like the films I made before broadcast didn't use this kind of like methodology, but I do think it's useful, whether it's a beat sheet or a shooting script or like just some kind of storyboard. Like you need to know what you would like to capture just to get an idea of if you've actually got the full story in your head.
Right. Right. I feel like it's almost like two different things, because sometimes, especially if you're doing like a multiple day shoot, you might not, like, the day that you say you're going to get establishing maybe is like
Mm-hmm.
a really bad day. It's like raining or something. So like you might have to like switch it. So I feel like there's one where it's like a storyboard of like, ideally this is what it is from like start to finish, like
Mm-hmm.
visuals, beats, arcs, all of that. And then you kind of have the like realistic, okay, like today is this day, we only have our character for 2 hours, like what are we going to
Yeah.
shoot? And it's more like logistically driven in a sense, where like you have to take your like creative storyboard ideal perfect
Mm-hmm.
situation and then be like, okay, like how do I take this creative beautiful thing and then make it realistic and like
Yeah.
plug stuff in as possible.
But that's why I find it so useful actually to have the shooting script, because then you know what you want to finish with ideally. And then you can be like, okay, so if I want something that looks like this, I now need to pull this apart and figure out what the bits of the jigsaw puzzle are and how does that look like in terms of a shot list or a shooting schedule.
Mm.
Because you're not necessarily going to film everything chronologically. Like it depends on the type of documentary. Many are shot chronologically, but like the establishing shots and things like that, for example, you
Mm-hmm.
depending on the project, you could just take a half day to go and do B-roll and establishing shots and like group that all together, and that can be much more efficient. So you definitely need that hat of like, you need to be able to switch between the creative, I don't know, like visionary, and then the more like logistically focused producer, I suppose.
Yes. And if you had any tips for somebody, interested in culture, interested in travel,
Mm.
language, maybe interested in filmmaking, like what are some things that you would recommend like exploring or learning, or do you have any like resources that you think somebody like yourself like 10 years ago might,
Mm.
benefit from?
Well, podcasts like this one are a great resource. But really, I think, yeah, like I was saying, I learned from the school of YouTube, like you can learn so many technical skills on there. But I would also just encourage, like, if I'm talking to me 10 years ago, it's like you have so many stories around you that are more inspiring than you might think. Like, you might be like, oh, I need to learn a lot more before I can go out and make something. Like, I would really invite young filmmakers to just use what they have around them. Like, I'm sure that you've got even stories within your family which could be interesting to tell. You don't have to be traveling to a foreign country to tell a story about a culture or about, I don't know, like these like microcosms of our society that like bring up interesting questions. So like pull out your phone or whatever it is you have and try filming some b-roll or some interviews or something that you think would be interesting to tell that story. Start to give it a go. Nobody even has to see it. um,
Yeah.
uh,
You don't
you
have to
can start,
post it. You can just make it first.
yeah, and just start like exercising that muscle, I think. Yeah, start exploring the types of stories you want to tell and pull inspiration from everywhere, from your own life, from podcasts you listen to, from conversations you have. Like you don't have to take everything from YouTube or from the documentaries you see.
Do you have any favorite apps or tools, whether it be like tangible, filmmaking things, whether it's a specific tripod or microphone, or, something that's like a software or something that might not be as well known that you use in your filmmaking career that someone else might try or want to use?
I don't know if this is really what you're looking for, but literally like my talking head like interview setup, it's the same one I've used for the last 2 or 3 years. Like if I'm just using the gear I've got at home rather than renting, I will use a Rode microphone, attach it to like a boom pole extension, and then use like a cable extender and plug it into either my camera or my external recorder. And I've just turned my like shotgun microphone into a boom mic. And I think
Mm,
that's a really handy little tip. So
you got to get crafty with it. You don't need all the fancy equipment. You just need some gaff tape, some extenders.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Any other like software things, like what if you have a creative idea or storyboarding or
Mm.
any favorite tools?
Well, in terms of tools, recently I've been loving using Notion, which is a bit of, it can be anything you want it to be. It's sort of like a project management tool. It can be just for note taking. Um, I love that. But honestly, like, I feel like the importance of producing a story and that as a art form in itself behind documentary filmmaking is really underestimated. And I don't think that there's a tool that can, like, there are tools you can use to help with that, but I love just my, like, I've got my notebook here. This is
Mm-hmm.
my, I mean, you can't see if you're just listening to audio, but I've got a special notebook here. And it's special because I know when I put something in here, it's going to be, I just let my creative juices run free and I do brainstorming and note taking. And this, I think, just using pen and paper, like, getting back to basics and just really the easiest way for you to get your ideas down should be part of your creative practice, whatever that looks like for you.
Love that. Thank you so much, Emily. I enjoyed our conversation so much.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me, Leah.
That's a wrap on today's episode. Thank you so much for listening and or watching. If you enjoyed this, if you had some fun listening to this, found something useful, please give us a review. It would mean the world to us as we are trying to grow this podcasting community. Just do it. Also, if you love talking docs, join our weekly Discord Wednesdays at 5 p.m. PST, where we discuss a doc of the week and check in with each other. Talk soon.